My name is Braden Olofsson. I'm joined today by Christian B-Côté, good friend of the show, good friend of mine, and fellow scout for Eastern Canada. Today we're here to provide basically a mid-season update for the 2007 birth year, the 2023 QMJHL draft. Last year, Lavoie by the end of the year seemed to be, by and large, at least with the teams, I think, seemed to be the favorite. Guys that did surprise me in the draft last year have worked out pretty well. Maxim Massé, obviously a stellar pick for Chicoutimi. He's a guy who, in hindsight, you almost would wonder if some team would have considered it first overall. But this year, yeah, like I'll say first and foremost, there is a player in the scope of the Q draft that if he had intentions of reporting to the QMJHL, I would say
as well.
yes, 100%. I would say there is a consensus, and I say consensus. I don't know that it would be really a consensus, but consensus, as far as I'm concerned, is a player that by no means would I consider taking anybody else first overall, and that's Zach Moran. If he was going to report to the QMJHL, anyways, I want to know what you're thinking. Who do
I
you
think
think?
that's a good point. I think that's a good point because last year, from the '07 class, while he was playing in Quebec, I think he would have remained kind of like the player to surpass.
Sure.
However, his decision to first go to play in for Little Caesars, I think, was either a first indication that maybe he wasn't coming to the Q, and people's opinions changed. Scouts in Quebec and the Maritimes tend to like to see their guys right in front. I think at least I do. You know, like if I go to a game and I'm like, oh yes, there's another player who's eligible, but he's not around. It's a bit more difficult to assess. Yeah, Zach Morin is a very good player, and I'm not taking anything away from him, but I don't think he'll be picked first overall, especially now with the tender. I wouldn't be surprised if a team kind of like Chicoutimi did last year, with multiple kind of first, second round picks, did try themselves, or teams traditionally that go for those home runs.
Would be
For
the
example,
Montreal-based teams, maybe.
I thought about that. I also have a bit of I think St. John would try themselves out. I think,
Interesting.
yeah. I don't know if there's a connection there, but I
You
do
heard it
think
here first.
hmm?
You heard it here first. Sea
Okay.
Dogs.
I just I'm it's not based on anything.
Yeah.
It's just kind of and based on some of the moves they've made, I think they would give it a shot. It's funny because there's not one position, like positional needs of a team will also come into play. I really like Alex Huang. Alex
Yeah.
Huang, for me, is not like your prototypical first overall pick, but everything I've seen of him, dating back to his M15 season, I've
Yeah.
always been very, very impressed. I've been very complimentary, I think, in my reports because I just really, really like the way he plays defensively. He's so smart, and I think his processing of the game is different than a lot of players that I've seen here in Quebec.
And I think the consistency's been there for him by and large throughout the season as well. I've seen a couple of games where I did find myself questioning whether or not he was part of that discussion. But then shortly thereafter, I would watch another and reaffirm myself that yeah, no, in fact, I think he is, if not first overall, certainly a top 5 pick in the class
Yep.
for sure. Yeah, there's a discussion to be had, I think, around a number of forwards that could be in that conversation. Caleb Desnoyers is obviously a name that
That's the one.
has a lot of momentum.
I think that is the one that is gaining steam, if there's
Yeah,
one.
his decision making leads to fast plays in a way.
Yeah.
Um,
And the
that's the way I
creativity
classify
and
him.
he's got the production to back it. I think, between him and Lecomte's got a lot of production as well this season. I
Yeah.
think if for teams that are looking for forwards, I think in Quebec we've kind of like highlighted, I think the two that people are going to spend a lot of time kind of bouncing back and forth with.
Other than that group of players, do you see anybody potentially challenging? If not, maybe for first overall, just a good maybe consensus player in the top 5.
I'm surprised that kind of Zach Wheeler's name has is dropped a little bit. I still think he's in conversation, and I think he's got like a good frame that could develop it. Like I've had people kind of open my eyes and compare him to Nathan Gaucher, and I'm a huge fan of Nathan Gaucher because I see him regularly here in Quebec.
Yeah.
But if like that's the seal, like that's the projection of what he could become, I like if I'm a team, I'm certainly looking at him
I
as
think you and
well.
I might have talked about that at the Monktonian about how people have said like Gaucher's skating wasn't even that much different than where Wheeler's at right now with his skating.
Mm,
Obviously, that's something like I think every time we talk about Wheeler, I say there's still room for improvement in his skating. But since I've been watching him, like going on 2 years with the Flyers now, he's improved quite noticeably in his skating already. It
mm,
seems like he's certainly on the right track. Excellent power forward with a lot of versatile characteristics in the offensive zone as well, and
mm.
a good supporting player in the defensive zone. He's not one who's going to hang his defenseman out to dry.
No, no. Definitely he's got the two-way element to him this and in a kind of a transition season. I think for the Flyers, I think he's been given a specific role, and it's not kind of like the high power offense that maybe they've had in past years.
Yeah.
But he's certainly kind of he's bringing the different elements, I think, to the team. So I think that's a like different qualities that you want to see in a potential high pick.
Right. Yeah. But that team wins too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that says a lot about a player who's willing to accept a role that, may not showcase or put him in the spotlight every single night. But I think a player who's selfless like that, who has the maturity to acknowledge, hey, this team is a team first team. And I just have to find where I fit into that every night. So
Mm-hmm.
well, there is one player I want to get your thoughts on, and I
Tell
just
me.
want to speak about him a little bit.
Go
Is
ahead.
Gite.
Okay.
So we're talking a couple St. Hyacinthe players here. I knew I had seen him earlier, and I knew I wasn't that impressed by him early. So it took me a little bit to for him to pull the rope back, and he certainly has. He's a dominant player in transition, and when you talk about Wheeler, I think you have to talk about Gite as well.
Good point. Very like two if you based on that body type or like a bigger player to complement like a skilled guy on your team, I think you see that with the combination of Guite and Desnoyers. Um, Guite might not have as many points, but I think he does a lot of things that help his line mate when the two are playing together. I think I think it's kind of like a hidden production that he brings.
I completely agree.
Like there's a top five I think that's in conversation, and then I think from like 5 to 25, you're getting a very good player.
Mhm.
Uh, but whether how you rank them, like how you rank that 5 to 25 can vary from one person to another. This is a group that I'm willing to give maybe a longer leash than some other classes before.
Sure.
Like we might not see it next season. It might be like one more season before we can go like, okay, this is where they should have probably. And I
Sure.
think it's like that every year, but especially this year.
One of the things that I see with this class is that, especially at the beginning of the year, I found that it was very forward heavy at the top. One thing I'm seeing now as the year kind of goes on is that some of the defensemen who maybe
Mm-hmm.
were not even on our radar at the beginning of the year or were less so on our radar at the beginning of the year have built themselves up a stronger reputation. I know there's
Mm-hmm.
one in particular that you're probably a fan of, relatively local, Louis Alex Tremblay, playing
Yes. Yeah.
for the Blizzard. He's come on over the last couple of months, I think, and built himself a strong reputation.
I agree. And, I was kind of weird at the start of the season seeing him play with Veilleux, whether Veilleux was carrying him. But I think instead of that, he was matching the standard that Veilleux was setting. If we're talking about defensemen, like mobile defensemen, not necessarily, I think there's two types in this draft class. There's the very quick kind of puck moving offensive defenseman, and then there's like the towers
Mhm.
that towering defenseman that you see a little bit more in the Maritimes, like Conrad, Sturgeon, Lindsay.
Right.
Julien
Will
Bonnet,
Murphy.
Will
Yeah.
Murphy as well.
Yeah.
Very, very tall, like imposing defenseman. And then on kind of closer to me, Louis-Alex Tremblay, Noah McKinnon, his teammate, a player who I've come to appreciate a lot more than maybe I did earlier in the season. Prud'homme is still kind of is a big
Yes,
body.
sure. Sure.
Um,
Benjamin Amiot.
yeah, Amiot, Bertrand in Gatineau. We're just naming
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
these a lot of players that are featured
Right in
in the
that
rankings.
category, you've got Noah Collette as well in Moncton.
Oh yeah, very
So
very good player.
you know that some of those guys on the smaller end of the scale right now are going to mix themselves right in, and
Mm-hmm.
you have to find a way to kind of project the skills of each of them. The big
Mm-hmm.
guys are going to have certain skills that are going to project, and certain things that maybe they're relying on right now. That's helping them to elevate their game in under 18.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of size, that kind of also applies to the forward group. But I do find this year there are a certain amount of forwards who are fairly controversial, who are on the smaller side of the
Well,
scale. Guys
mm-hmm.
like Sam Alabi
Mm-hmm.
from RNS. I love Alabi's game. Just by and large, I think he's one of the most can be one of the most competitive players in any given game.
If you're able to find your way out, I think that's an advantage.
Yep.
Um, and it works at this level. I think that's again we're trying to see if it will it continue to work for players like Alabi, LF Bélanger in at Notre Dame.
Yep.
Um,
Noah Seasman.
just
Um, I
I
saw
haven't seen him this season, so
I saw him
I have
play
no
this
assessment
weekend.
on him. Tell me.
I, I was previously going off all video, but I saw him play at RNS this last weekend, and I thought, I mean, the second period he had was excellent. The first period, I was, I wrote quite a few notes in the game, and I thought after the first period, I thought, okay, maybe I don't really have a great feeling of where he fits in. I think his skating is very quick, but I think his stride has some room for improvement. So he's one of those guys I would put in that conversation. Tyson Gogan, I haven't seen play live, but I really want to. I don't know if I'm going to get an opportunity to see him live at any point in the year. Olivier Metcalf, another one who's a little smaller, and plays very fast and can be very competitive in transition as well.
There's a lot of very good players on that Sanders stash team. Like either finished first overall weeks ahead of time before the end of the season.
Yeah,
But yeah, you mentioned Metcalf, Lampron, Tassé, uh, forwards that come to mind. Labelle, like
sure.
maybe not in our top 10, but if we're talking players from the same team and structure, like
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of players from Sanders Stash, Milil, and Select du Nord that all kind of
Okay.
get
Yeah,
together.
that is the structure there. Hey,
Yep,
you know,
North Montreal.
and then yeah, I think San Eustache is the team who's currently leading in terms of representation in our top 80. So Huang, Lapron,
Lampron
Tasse,
is the one I forgot.
Metcalf, Labelle, and Charles Desmet. So of course, tons of talent around the league. Do you feel like there's any out there maybe who fit into that category who aren't being recognized right now as players who have really high skill sets, but probably have a chance or have a good chance of translating to the Q sooner rather than later, who are just solid players? Like guys that I think of like that are Prud'homme fits into that category for
Yeah,
me. Like
on defense.
I
Yeah.
see him as a really really solid two-way defenseman. Olivier Gru is another
Oh
player
yeah.
who kind of like we talked about Emile Guite over the last couple of months. He's always been there, but I think he's more or less found what his role is with
Yeah.
Chateauguay, and it's worked out for him.
He definitely stood out and used his size positively to like for things like puck retrieval, protecting in the offensive zone, and again allowing his line mates to do their creative moves.
Right.
And he's got his own like his shot is very good. He's got his own finishing power,
Yeah.
and I think he's yeah. If you're talking about size, like a player that it's easy to see at the next level. You can kind of imagine him a little bit more easily than some of the smaller players. I think that's Olivier Giroud is a good example of a player that we can kind of pencil as like, yeah, likely to play a major junior and play well.
Again, just a guy who has, over the last couple of months of the season, found what his role is to help his team actually have success. And by doing that, he's made himself look a whole lot better as well. And Châteauguay in general is a team I've enjoyed watching this year. Obviously, you've got the two big defensemen in Prud'homme and Amiot, but then you've got Gru, obviously Nathan Lecomte, who we talk about as being a top three player in the class, and then Charles Hawthorne-Waite.
So I think he's gone back to playing with Bourget, the team he was with last year. So he might not be kind of as easy to track, but definitely like a good skilled player that we won't see in Châteauguay for the rest of the season.
It's unfortunate because I've really enjoyed watching him. I think he's a really tactical thinker who makes himself available really well. Really quick puck touches. Under 18 was the best spot for him to develop and play that high speed. But yeah, it's too bad. There's been a little bit of that going on. There's one other player that I wanted to touch on as well. Vincent Desmarais was moved from Magog as well up to his window opened up in Notre Dame, right?
So he would have finished the season with Canimex because he's a Drummondville native. But then over in Notre Dame, at Collège Notre Dame, Paré is injured out for the rest of the season. Rimouski pick. So that opened up a spot on defense. One of their players, Vachon, whose rights belonged to, I think, Drummondville, his rights got traded to Chicoutimi, and Chicoutimi brought him up right away. So that opened up the spot, and immediately Desmarais was able to slot in. And all this has to happen very quickly because like school's about to start, and he kind of found himself like the Q deadline, and then this was a kind of I'm sure a crazy week for him. But it's featuring very well with Notre Dame since joining them.
Yeah, he was a player watching with Magog who I was quite impressed with, and looking forward to continue to watch him with Notre Dame. Are there guys like that who their skill set on their own might lend them to being like a second round pick, could jump into the first round because they're going to be at such a premium, or anyone like that jumps to mind?
Kind of quickly thinking of guys that we haven't brought up yet that definitely would be in consideration as like high picks. Sean Carrier, who had like an awesome season last year at the M15 level. A little bit more of an adjustment this year, but you can't take away what he did last year. Like, and I think it shows kind of the adjustment that players go through in their first year. But he's definitely, I think, a player that has will continue to have a high ceiling. Another one that I've circled is Matteo Nobert, that I have very limited viewings because he plays for Lac Saint Louis outside of my region, and I just haven't seen him very, very much here. But at l'Abbé, I was very impressed with some of the plays that he was able to make, like a move that he repeatedly does cross the blue line, cut to the middle, but it seems to work for him, and he's used on the right point on the power play, so very versatile that way as well. So those are two guys that I think would be worth talking about as well. We haven't talked about Philippe Veilleux. Philippe Veilleux is like people have talked about for many years with the skills videos.
He was a Hey Barber kid, wasn't he, or something like that? Yeah.
So it's kind of caught me by surprise this year when I was like, oh, okay, now he's draft eligible age.
I don't know if it's a tough situation that he's in. Like, I feel like the beginning of the year, Veilleux was, to me, was a top 3 or 4 player. And granted, I haven't watched him play probably over the last 3 weeks to month or so, but towards Christmas time, I started to, not feel quite as strongly about him. Maybe that he wasn't like Sean Carrier obviously had a strong finish to 2022, and players like that who maybe it's not so much a case of Veilleux not not being in favor so much as it is like other players just developing really well. But I think on an individual basis, he's a guy who you absolutely can't overlook for sure. I think he's ranked 7th on our list right now. Cole Chandler is a guy that like Nova Scotia. They're sort of in my region-ish, sort of not, and I see them probably as much as I see the Quebec players. But I've been trying to revisit a little bit more video from Nova Scotia over the last month or so.
In my limited viewings, like kind of summed up to a couple games at Monctonian, he was a player that stood out, and I think I wouldn't be surprised to see him get picked early.
Yeah, and I guess to jump back to what my original kind of prompt was for this discussion is there a certain type of player who could be at a premium, and he might fit into, some people might look at Wheeler, some people might look at Guite, some people might look at Chandler, but if there's a team who has a favorite of that archetype, I don't know if you consider those three guys to be of the same archetype just because they're all 6'1" or whatever. They're different players. There's nuance in each of their games, of course, but if there's a certain player that a team feels like he checks more boxes than the next guy, and he has the size already, I think it would not be surprising to see one of them jump a little bit higher for sure. Sleepers, are there any guys in your mind right now that are not being recognized by us or being recognized by CSR or being recognized by other outlets just in general that have impressed you to this point in the season? And maybe there's even one particular quality about them that you feel like that guy has something, he's something special. I think a team should take a chance on him.
I'm going based on teams that I've seen the most, kind of in my area in the division that I see the most from Quebec M18. There's a couple players in Jonquière. There's at least 3 Tremblays that are draft eligible.
There's a lot of good players in Newfoundland, and I don't want to. I feel like we've left them out of the conversation to this point. Guys from that are playing south of the border, Jabba Seymour and Ty Pettigrew, and then like I'm just going down my list here. Elliot Wright, big forward, who plays for the Growlers. Ryan Daw, Andy Knight is an overager, who really impressed me at the Monctonian.
Again, in my region, I think players, if we talk about players that aren't getting as much talked about as much as maybe I think they should, there's 2 defensemen, 207 defensemen playing for Lévis, Émeric Paris and Alexandre Dallaire. Lévis having a bit of a strange year where their record's pretty good. I was kind of shocked when I checked their record, but they've lost a lot of players at the kind of break there. And they also have a 07 goalie, but the 2 defensemen, Paris and Dallaire, are
unheralded.
Not talked about as much, but taking up big roles on that team.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Christian. Great discussion as always. We could go for hours longer. We could go through every player and go through our notes, of course. But I hope it's been good for those tuning in, and looking forward to having you on again soon.
Likewise, thanks for having me, and look forward to the end of the season, end of regular seasons, and definitely Canada games. And there's still some movement possible in the rankings, and especially if we get 200, we'll start to see a little bit more players from M17, AAA, maybe a couple of RSEQ players that I've been keeping an eye on. So I'm excited for that as well.
Excellent. All right. Good night, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.